Welcome to episode 117 of Gods and Heroes of Ancient Greece. My name is MyLinda, Butterworth, and today we continue with the tales of Troy and the story of the destruction of Troy. Late into that night, the Trojans gave themselves up to feasting and celebrating. Flute boys moved among the revelers. Again and again the cups were filled with wine, seized in both hands and drained to the last drop. At midnight, when tongues and lids grew heavy and all were dulled with sleep, Sinon, who had feasted with the rest, pretended to grow drowsy. He rose from his couch, walked softly out of the gates, lit a torch, and waved it so that it could be seen on the shores of Tenedos. Then he extinguished it, crept up to the horse, and knocked gently on the belly, as Odysseus had told him to do. The heroes heard the sound, but they only turned in silence to receive the command of the son of Laertes. He bade them go out as quietly as possible, and warned those who were most impatient. Noiselessly he slid back the bolts, put out his head, and looked around to make sure that no one was awake. Then, as a ravening wolf prowls softly to the sheep pen between watchful shepherds and dogs, he climbed down the rungs of the ladder which Epeius had made along with the horse. One hero after another followed him, his heart thudding against his ribs. When the wooden belly had disgorged all its inmates, they brandished their lances, drew their swords, and scattered throughout the city. And now, dreadful slaughter overtook the Trojans. Dazed with sleep and wine, firebrands were tossed into their homes, and soon the roofs began to burn over their heads. At the same time, a favorable wind carried the fleet from Tenedos into the harbor on the Hellespont, and soon after the entire Argive host rushed into the city through the broad breach the Trojans themselves had cut for the horse. The already vanquished city was filled with screams of agony. The maimed and wounded crawled among corpses, and anyone who still ran unharmed was hit in the back with a lance. Dogs yelped and howled above the moans of the dying, and the clamor was swelled by the wails of women and children. But the Argives, too, had heavy losses, for although the greater part of their enemy were unarmed, they fought as well as they could. Some hurled their cups at the foe. Others snatched burning brands from the hearth, or hacked about with spits, hatchets, axes, or whatever they could lay their hands on. So the Danai had to be on their guard. Stones were thrown at them from the rooftops, and some were crushed by burning walls, which collapsed as they passed. When they had fought their way to the Acropolis, many Trojans issued fully armed from the palace of Priam, so that the Argives had to fight for their lives. In the course of the battle, the city grew lighter and lighter, though it was still night, for the many torches carried by the Achaeans and the brilliance of the spreading conflagration made Troy as bright as day. And now that the Argives no longer feared to mistake friend for foe in the dark, they became bolder and went purposefully by the noblest among the Trojan heroes. Diomedes killed Corybus, son of Mygdon, by driving his lance through his stomach. Then he slew Eurydamas, the son-in-law of aged Antenor. Soon after he met Ilioneus, one of the oldest among the Trojans, who fell on his knees and, catching at the victor's sword, cried in a trembling voice, "Whoever you may be, give up your anger, for only victory over the young and strong brings glory. Spare an old man, for you too someday may be old and look for mercy." For an instant Diomedes stayed his sword and hesitated, but then he pierced his enemy's throat, saying, "I do hope to grow to honored old age, but first I must use my young strength to send all my foes to Hades." And he rushed on and killed many other Trojans. Ajax of Locris and Idomeneus were also pursuing the Trojans relentlessly. But Neoptolemus picked out the sons of Priam as his victims and slew 3 of them. And after that, Agenor, who had dared fight with Achilles, his father, finally he came on Priam himself. The old man was praying at an altar of Zeus built out in the open. Eagerly, Neoptolemus lifted his sword. Priam looked him fearlessly in the eye. "Slay me, O son of brave Achilles," he said. "I have suffered much. Many of my children have died before my eyes. Why should I still see the light of the sun? I wish I had died long before this. I wish a father had killed me, since he did not satisfy your own fierce heart and release me from my grief." "Old man," Neoptolemus answered, "you urge me to do what my own soul bids." And he cut off the old king's head lightly and swiftly as the reaper in the heat of summer mows the grain in the sun-baked field. The head rolled along the ground, and the body lay among the corpses of other Trojans. The common warriors in the Argive host were far more cruel. In the king's palace they found Astyanax, Hector's little son. They snatched him from his mother's arms, and full of hatred against Hector and his line, hurled him down from the ramparts. When they wrested him from his mother, she cried, "Throw me from the wall too, or cast me into the flames. Since Achilles killed my husband, I have been living only for my child. Take from me the agony of a life without him." But the men did not even listen to her and stormed away. So death prowled about, entering this house and now that. He spared only one, the home of old Antenor, who had been so generous and kindly a host to Odysseus and Menelaus and saved their lives long ago when they came to Troy as envoys. For this the Danai now spared him and left him all his possessions. As long as Troy was under siege, Aeneas had fought from the walls with unbroken strength. But when he saw the city burning in all quarters, when he realized that further resistance was useless, he acted like a brave sailor in a storm who defends his ship against the raging sea as long as possible. But when he knows that sinking is inevitable, abandons it to the waves and tries to save himself in a boat. So now Aeneas took his father, Anchises, on his broad shoulders, his son Ascanius by the hand, and hastened away. The boy pressed close to his father, and his feet hardly touched the earth as Aeneas leaped across the countless bodies which littered the streets. And Aphrodite never left her son's side, for whenever he went, the flames reduced, the clouds of smoke parted, and the arrows and spears the Danai hurled at him fell harmlessly to the ground. In other places, murder was abroad. Just outside the chambers of faithless Helen, Menelaus, her first husband, found Deiphobus, son of Priam. Since Hector's death, he had been the pillar of his house and his people after Paris was slain. Helen had fallen to his share. He was still drowsy and numb with the evening's carousal, and he staggered to his feet and fled through the corridors of the palace. But Menelaus overtook and killed him with his sword. "Die here at my wife's door," he cried in a voice like thunder. "If only I could have killed Paris in this place! But just as he had to die, so you too shall not take delight in Helen and go unpunished. You shall learn that no one who does wrong can escape the hands of Themis, goddess of justice." And Menelaus rolled the corpse to one side with his foot and started on a search through the palace, for his heart, torn with emotions, yearned for Helen. Fearing her husband's anger, she had hidden herself in the farthest corner of the house, and it took a long time to find her. When he first caught sight of her, jealousy prompted him to slay her. But Aphrodite, who had made her even fairer than before, struck the sword from his hand, dispelled his rage, and woke the old love sleeping in his heart. He was bewitched by Helen's beauty, and again his hand refused to raise the sword. Suddenly, he forgot all the wrong she had done. But when he heard the battle cry of the Argives, he felt ashamed to think that he was standing in front of false Helen, not as an avenger, but as her slave. Against his will, he picked up the sword which had fallen in the ground, curbed his passion, and aimed a blow at his wife. But in his heart, he hated to harm her, and so he was relieved when Agamemnon came up to him, laid his hand on his shoulder, and said, "Wait, Menelaus. It's not proper for you to slay your lawful wife, for whose sake we have endured so much suffering. She is far less at fault than Paris, who broke the laws of hospitality. But he and all his line and all his people have now been punished. They have paid with their lives." So spoke Agamemnon, and Menelaus obeyed him with seeming reluctance, but inner joy. While this was happening on earth, the immortals veiled themselves in cloud and mourned the fall of Troy. The only ones to rejoice so greatly that they shouted with satisfaction were Hera, the deadly enemy of the Trojans, and Thetis, the mother of Achilles, who had died in the flower of manhood. Pallas Athene could not restrain her tears, even though she had constantly worked for the fall of Troy, for she saw Ajax, the wild son of Oileus, enter her temple. There he seized Cassandra, her priestess, who had sought refuge in the sanctuary, and was clasping her image, and dragged her away by the hair. The goddess did nothing to help the daughter of her foes, but her cheeks burned with anger, and her image gave forth a sound that shook the floor of the temple. Turning her eyes from the scene of crime, she swore to avenge the wrong done to Cassandra. The conflagration and slaughter went on for a long time. Like the pillar, the flame soared to heaven and announced the fall of the city to all those who lived on islands nearby, and to the ships which plied back and forth on the sea. And here is where I end my tale for today. But I'll be back with more tales. Many more tales. Until then, my friends, enjoy the journey.